start now with panel 1 of the presentations, which has the theme Africanization of higher education. The chair for this session is PhD candidate Moffat Machiwenyika, and the plenary discussant after the presentations will be PhD candidate Edward Mboyonga. So Moffat, I hope you're here.
Fenella. So our presenters for today is Dr. Monique Kwachou and Dr. Carmen Martinez-Vargas.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I don't know about others, but I can barely hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Better, thanks.
Okay, all right. So our presenters for this plenary session 1 is Dr. Monique Kwachou and Dr. Carmen Martinez-Vargas. The first presenter is Dr. Monique Kwachou. Dr. Monique Kwachou is a Cameroonian writer, youth worker, and researcher of gender studies and education for development. She has over 8 years of professional experience working with higher education institutions and civil society organizations. Monique's research generally prioritizes African feminism, critical pedagogy, and capabilitarian analysis for the engendering and overall improvement of education. She is currently engaged as a postdoctoral research fellow with the Higher Education and Human Development Research Group of the University of the Free State, South Africa. And her topic is recentering the African in theory and in process collaborations for contextually suited knowledge production. I'll hand over to Dr. Monique Kwachou. Dr. Monique? Dr. Monique, over to you.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much. I'm going to welcome everybody to our first panel. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Hopefully we have for some reason I've just today. So in God's name. Okay, for some reason, Fenella, I loaded my slide already. Could you take over and share it, please? For some reason, I'm not seeing it here.
Monique, I'm not seeing it either.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to log out and log back in again, as it seems this is going to be a problem.
Moffat, do you know what's happening with Monique?
She has logged off and she's logging on again. Dr. Monique is having challenges with loading her slides. Vanilla, I don't know if you can assist.
Well, I'm wondering, Carmen, is there a chance that you would be ready to step in now while we help sort Monique out?
Yes, of course. I'm just uploading the presentation.
Okay. Well, Moffat, why don't you introduce Carmen, and the back we'll try and sort Monique out, and we can do Carmen's presentation first, and then Monique later. Thank you, Carmen.
Okay. So Dr. Carmen is a higher education and human development research group fellow with several years experience working with participatory approaches, that is participatory methods, methodologies, and research processes within the global north and the global south. A PhD project and subsequent research have problematized intersections of decolonization and social justice in the context of human development. And her presentation topic is capabilities negotiations in the Pan-African and post-pandemic university perspectives from student activists. Dr. Carmen, you have 30 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Moffat, and thank you, Vanilla. And thank you, everyone, for all the organization of this event. And I'm really pleased to be here today to present about a project. So I'm here not just by myself, but actually in representation of the TFS team who we're working together. So today I'm going to be presenting capability negotiations in the Pan-African and post-pandemic university perspective from a student activist. And our intention today was to bring this paper to the colloquium as an ongoing process, as what we have so far, the project is not completed yet. And we're still analyzing the part of the findings, and we see these findings as ongoing. So our intention is to get feedback and to get inputs from different collectives, including the academic collective that is present today, so we can push our thinking forward. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is I'm going to contextualize where this project is coming from and the role of the TFS network. And I will continue highlighting a bit of background and the significance of this study and case study in South Africa. I will mention quickly about the aims and research question. And then I will explain a bit about the process, because we think is as much important the process as it is the outcomes and the findings. So I will go briefly there. I won't have a lot of time to go into detail, but I will be happy to respond to any questions later on. And then I will conclude just presenting part of the outcomes that we have so far in terms of internal and combined capabilities. And I will conclude with the partially completed Ubuntu supporting institutional capabilities. So in terms of the TFS network or project and where it is situated, the TFS network aims to understand how education systems can act as drivers of sustainable development in the countries of India, Rwanda, Somaliland, and South Africa. And this is a network funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund through the Economic and Social Research Council Network Plus scheme. So it's coordinated by the University of Bristol, and we are part of what we call the South African Hub and the South African team of groups from different projects around the country. And our project is centered around higher education and titled Universities as Sustainable Communities. So our project was approved around July last year, and we officially started in November. But the project started before with the planification and thinking around the project around April. And it will conclude around October, November this year. The team is composed by 4 higher education and human development researchers and 13 activist students who are coming from different activist group on campus on the University of the Free State, plus an admin person who is assisting us with all the administrative matters of the project. So the project is just based in one university, the University of the Free State, and our approach to research is a participatory research process that I will go a bit into detail later on. And as I said, what we have so far is more grounded data that we are still making sense of it. So even if we're just in the capability approach to kind of understand a bit, this is not final because we obviously want to push our thinking much more, and we still have a lot of things to debate and agree about the project. So in terms of the background, I would like to mention that sustainability in higher education has been broadly researched, and we found areas of research focusing on approaches and methods, on communication, on research, on sustainable learning and campus operations. But it's true that when we try to look where students are in all this literature, they are usually often on research on courses and curriculum. So how the university is actually implementing these sustainability courses and curriculums. But the problem here is that when you look carefully at these studies, students are there just to be given the sustainable materials that are somehow escalated from the top down of what the university is supposed to do, and how the university is supposed to advance towards these more sustainable institutions. And even sometimes it's just a matter of seeing how the university is actually contributing to zero waste and other kind of approaches. So what we see is that there is little relevance of student perspectives and aspirations towards this sustainable future and future university, but also there is this kind of elimination or negation of the discourses that are imposed in some institutions, especially in the global south, about what they should do in terms of sustainability, as there are not concerns of what is needed locally in terms of sustainability. So we kind of agree that there is no one universal way of seeing the university as a sustainable community, and we also are conscious of the legacies of these powerful discourses and impositions on these institutions. So our project wanted to to bring the other aspect, not necessarily because we don't have anything to learn or to bring from the top down, that of course we do, but rather like bringing them both together. What is locally needed from already forces of resistances from these activist groups, so we can escalate it and put it in conversation with sustainable discourses to generate recommendations for, in this case, the University of the Free State, to drive more into locally based sustainable approaches at the same time as is in communication with global agendas. So I'm not gonna, because we have a lot of research questions and they're part of different phases of the research process, but I would like to highlight the main aim of the project, who is to co-develop a conceptualization of a sustainable university community that will inform an action plan for African, indigenous, locally centered conception of higher education for sustainable development at the University of the Free State. And when we were thinking about all these aims and questions, we left it open, and we didn't want to point out what it is exactly that we are. Are we African? Are we indigenous? Are we locally centered? And this is the space where we encounter the team and then move forward with terminology that makes sense to us and actually we need to develop further. So in terms of the process, just to mention, the project is divided into 6 different phases. At the moment, we're somewhere in between we're in phase 3, but we're somewhere in between 3 and 4. And we've been busy, of course, since last year with these different phases, but there is a lot to do still. And that's why today we don't have any final results, but rather ongoing thinking and outcomes of the project. In phase number 0, and this is somehow it overlapped with phase number 1, it was this pre-implementation and co-design and the baseline. So of course there was a process in which it was more about focusing on the proposal and the processes to submit it to the call for projects. But it was quite important as well, this negotiation with the students about do we want to answer these research questions? Do we need to change them? What are the ethical principles that are going to guide our research and so on? So before starting the project, it was all these phases of reflecting and thinking together about how to accommodate the whole team on it. And then we have the internal exploration, which is more focused on the core team, on answering the internal research questions. And then here we had meetings every 2 weeks from January to March. And we've been actually busy in this dialogic space of trying to answer this complex questions, because we were coming from different perspectives and from different political agendas. And then phase 3 was the articulation of ecologies of knowledges, in which we assumed that the knowledge that we possess in the group is incomplete, and therefore we need to extend our thinking further, to be criticized and get feedback, so we can not necessarily complete the outcome, but rather diversified and see blind spots in our thinking. After that, we will have the story production and then the dissemination plan and final engagement and collective evaluation. I just want to mention a couple of things about key points on the phases 0, 1, 2, and 3. So in phase number 0 and 1, we had to think critically about the terminology, and it was a lot of debate about whether the ways that we were expressing the research questions were actually capturing what we wanted to do as a team. So we actually changed many of them and the terminology just to represent. And one of the cases was the concept of sustainability and how the group show sustainability as not representing what they understand in that way. So at the end, we came up with Ubuntu, but it was a whole thing of trying to align ourselves in one concept that was able to represent all of us as this Pan-African group. So we were not understanding sustainability as sustaining or maintaining, but rather as constantly transforming fluidity and flexibility in the way of assisting others to become better and to become better together. So that's the reason behind, but we have many other points here and there from the research questions that were changed because of that. In terms of the ethical considerations, it happened the same. Although we had an agreed ethical, let's say like a draft, we found out that throughout the project, this needs to be revisited constantly because the situation changed and we need to discuss this matters. And in terms of the phase number 2 and the workshops that we had, it was a combination between more structured workshops, but also more dialogic kind of based workshops. And here what we did was to combine everything that was coming out from the workshop with transcripts from the workshop, with analysis, and then coming back and discussing everything to make sure that we were all represented in those answers and we were part of it as a team that thinks differently, because we were trying to create this maximum representation as possible. We did want to find the communal points between all of us, but we didn't want to leave the complexity out. So that's why it was a lot of discussion about that. And then in terms of the identification of epistemological gaps, what we did was to agree a list of people and groups that we needed to discuss or internal question with in order to collect their inputs and their critical perspectives on our understanding, so we can have this this more representation of different knowledges that are not necessarily presented in the core group. So today, as I said, I'm just going to focus on part of these internal research questions because we thought this will be there will be the ones that could generate more discussion in this specific space, academic space. And we are going to present the capabilities that the team had risen to value generally. And this we divided into internal and combined capabilities. But I'm going to mention later on about the complexities and the debates and the ideas that we are still discussing about that. And then at the end, I will present which capabilities and functionings are considered necessary to promote a Ubuntu-based community university in our case from what we have. And yeah, as you're going to see, this is still really, really incomplete. So what happened with the internal and combined capability is that in our discussions, what we were capturing is that there was some kind of a really important aspect of individual predisposition that is usually formed by education and by our family background that is really important and really valuable for many of us. But at the same time, we also have another set of valuable capabilities that were more in the context of the university and the ways that we as individuals are with the university, and that's why we call it combined. So in terms of internal capabilities, we didn't call them even yet capabilities because we are trying to make sense of this yet. But what we came out as a classification is about this 3 different levels of ideals that kind of impregnate the other levels, the values, but also kind of how this is at the personal level as personality traits. And I think these are quite important because they are part of of us being activists and part of us as rooted in this particular context. And I'm quite sure for many of you, if you're familiar with the South African context, many of them are going to resonate. So we talk about confidence, about resilience, about perseverance and determination, sociable and relatable, but also about inspiring confidence on others, solution-oriented, growth. Sorry, I have the person coming into the room. Solution-oriented, growth mindset, but also radical, to approach, this inequalities and how we take radical approaches to try to resolve. So as I said, we're still thinking here about whether we're going to merge them into capabilities, or we need to maybe look for another theoretical framework that help us to highlight this kind of ways of being and doing in the world as well. In terms of combined capabilities, what we did is to divide them. And in this case, we think they are capabilities. It's just that some of the aspects, we're not sure if they are functioning, so part of some capabilities, or we need to merge some of them as one particular capability, but we're in the process of thinking that. And here we divide especially three different sections, and I think they're quite relevant to our group. The first one is learning, education, and knowledge capabilities. The second one is activism, advocacy, and leadership capability as activists, and seeing this as central and what we value. And the third one is employability and work capabilities, but this were framed in a really interesting way that I will mention right now. So in terms of learning and education, we mentioned, we kind of agree on this list, and of course some of them has been mentioned in the literature, but some others are not, like Umbrabulo, but also unlearning and especially cultivating love for education. So we're still trying to figure it out, what is the contribution and whether we have to merge some of them. But also in activism part of it is an activism towards improving the lives of others, and that's why this creating access was really important. But we will see later on in the institutional list how this access is combined at different levels. Navigation within the institution and the power structures of being a leader and an activist. Community building, carrying the aspiration of others, solution-oriented, being able to influence others, being able to consult and be consulted, participation and engagement, being able to express oneself freely, collect action, revolutionary spirit, and resilient. And especially all this aspect came from things that we know they are wrong and difficulties that many of us have faced in the university environment, and that make us really have good reasons to value and to put them at the forefront of our thinking, and what do we want to push that later on comes out into a list, an aspirational list for the institution. And in terms of employability, we were because of course the group is really diverse, and as I was mentioning before, we wanted to keep that diversity going on and not necessarily quickly reduce into the communalities. And it was a lot of debate about being competent, but also the labor, but not the labor, even though we mention about remunerated work and the implication that has for our well-being and others. We mention more labor and competent in terms of contributing to the community in a not remunerated way, but rather as a community that need to labor for others in order to function and to function for the well-being of many. And then we have two other capabilities that we were not sure where to place. That is to be healthy, and especially the aspect of mental health is quite important. I think it has been the focus of the beginning of this conversation today in the colloquium. And the engagement, engage and explore, being exposed to other cultures, language, work, and spaces. So as I said, this is a kind of open-ended findings that we are still trying to think about it. And to conclude today, I would like to focus on what we call Ubuntu supporting institutional capabilities. And before going into the different capabilities, I want to mention about the Ubuntu word, the conversations that we had, but also whether Ubuntu was part of the title of the list or it was capabilities within the list. So in terms of Ubuntu, we had a lot of discussions because we're a diverse group from different nationalities as well. And we were discussing at the beginning that a Pan-African or Pan-Africanism approach will represent the political approach of the group without excluding anyone. But it's true that when we were talking about this sustainability element and which kind of term can make can represent most of us, if not necessarily all of us. So we were discussing other terms such as Ujamaa, and it was difficult to really come into one. But it's true that after kind of voting and deciding which one, we end up using Ubuntu. But I still think that we have a long way of discussion, and this might change as perhaps might keep as Ubuntu, because I think there is a lot of understanding about the connection with others, and we think of Ubuntu beyond individuals' connections. So it's also a connection with environment, but we are still making sense of that together. So in terms of the list of capabilities, and this is not only common because, as I said, I'm presenting today in the name of everyone, only part of what we have so far. This list is not only coming from reflecting what we have reason to value, but from critically assessing all the inequalities that we face on our daily basis, on the university environment, what we think is wrong from different perspectives, and our aspiration to change this kind of dynamics. So even if it's idyllic, it has been a lot of debates about the practical implications and what kind of practices do we need to foster. So it's just that today I'm more presenting this ideal Ubuntu list, institutional list. So in terms of the capabilities, we have a unity capability in terms of gathering this multi-epistemic, multicultural, multiracial, and multilingual institution. And as well, it was a lot of debate about the word unity because it can be exclusive of one united. And it's true that even if we discuss it and we were not sure, we decided to go ahead because of the context and the importance of connection and bringing together. But we will definitely continue thinking about that. The humanizing capability, as I said, it was this discussion whether we needed to have an Ubuntu capability or it was an Ubuntu-based list. So we decided to have this humanizing capability focus more on respect, dignity, tolerance, and accepted, but then all of them will be aligned with Ubuntu values and ways of being. In terms of people centeredness capability, here is appreciating human development diversity and not for-profit center institution. And this capability comes especially from this instrumental way that the university see workers and students, and how we wanted to shift to center about human diversity and the people that compose this institution. Transformational capability in terms of a fluid institution that moves along quickly and evolves with societal needs. And the pandemic here has been critical, but not necessarily the only aspect, because we were coming from being part of many and embody many injustices. And then with the pandemic, this was accentuated and even more nuanced than it was before. So something that came really strongly from the beginning from our group was this need of seeing institutions and the university in our case as something dynamic and flexible who is adapting to the specific needs, not how a pandemic comes and then the university takes really long to put in place measures to palliate the consequences that is creating for learning and jeopardizing the learning of the students and the work of the staff members of the institution, but also, of course, in other aspects and policies that need to be changed within the institution. A special freedom, it was not necessarily meant only as a safe space, although it's part of it, but it was more in terms of belonging. And we were mentioning here a lot about access to resources, as I'm going to mention in the coming ones, and how we want to see an institution that is a home for us, that everyone feels belonging, and that is part of this spatial freedom that we have. In terms of supporting academic capability, accessibility capability, and inclusive learning capability, they are somehow interconnected, but we are not sure whether we are going to merge them or we want to keep them separate, because the supportive and accessibility is more about having equal access to resources and facilities, but also spaces and information. And then the support is in terms of supporting the learning. But inclusive learning was including the dimension of being able to learn about our interests and including indigenous knowledges, but being able to choose as well the modes of learning. And this linked to this kind of transformational capability of the institution to accommodate and to be flexible. And then the last one is the healing and reparations capability. And I think here it was a lot of debate about how we need to critically understand the historical background of our institutions and our university, but also not necessarily actions in terms of reparations, like we have been seeing around the country in changing names and changing statues, but rather as the at the emotional and spiritual level as well, that allow for the space of bringing this trauma and healing together in this complexity of pain that goes beyond representing a name or any other symbol. So I would like to conclude with that. I would like to say thank you everyone for being here, and we are looking forward to your feedback and your input. And I would like to say that again, you know, I'm here in representation of the whole team, so I hope I made justice to our work. But some of them are here as the audience, so please feel welcome to join into the discussion or to add anything that perhaps I miss as part of the presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carmen, for the engaging and excellent presentation. I now announce our second speaker, which is Dr. Monique Kwachou. I'll read her bio again. She's a Cameroonian writer, youth worker, and researcher of gender studies and education for development. She has over 8 years of professional experience working with higher education institutions and civil society organizations. Monique's research generally prioritizes African feminism, critical pedagogy, and capitalian analysis for the engendering and overall improvement of education. She is currently engaged as a postdoctoral research fellow with the Higher Education and Human Development Research Group of the University of the Free State. And her topic today that she's presenting is recentering the African in theory and process, collaboration for contextually suited knowledge production. I now hand over to Dr. Monique.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry about earlier on, and hopefully this time it works. So as I've already been introduced, I'm just going to go straight to it. I am presenting today on, sorry, for some reason, I can no longer see my slides. Okay. I think Bertha took control of it, so she'll be guiding me to prevent any further problems. So going forward, to the next slide, please. Today, I'm going to be talking about the need for us to recenter our African subjects and African issues, African thoughts, African philosophies in our research, and especially thinking of where we're going to next. Over the past decade, scholarship in the humanities and social sciences fields have proven again and again that the accuracy and the relevance of the research that we do, our findings, is based on the suitability of the lenses that we use. In even more recent years, we have highlighted that the ways mainstream research theories and practices are, the ways of research mainstream theories and practices are fundamentally Eurocentric and particularly inadequate when it comes to framing African issues. So the argument I'm making here today is that we must consider, as we consider the state of contemporary research in African higher education and other issues, and as we consider where to go to from here, it's imperative that we try our best to center African thought and African subjects in theory and practice. Decolonizing and Africanizing are in vogue. Everybody wants to decolonize and everybody wants to indigenize, but these two things are often used interchangeably and often confused with each other. What exactly are they? And how do we do them in practice? So today I'm going to use an illustration from my 3-year study on the assumptions of Cameroonian women's empowerment through higher education and how I endeavored to center African thought and experience in the course of that study. Coming from there, I'm going to make recommendations on how we can do this elsewhere, how we can center the African in other instances of research. So about my research. Basically, in Cameroon, let me tell you a bit about the study. In Cameroon, there is a problem of, there's an assumption, and this is not only in Cameroon, it's all over the world. There's a assumption that the more educated a woman is, the more empowered she will be. As a result, we have women who have exceptional levels of education, and in Cameroon, an exceptional level would be, let's say, graduate studies up onward, are considered to be too much. So there's this problem of having too much education. And my study tried to examine whether these women actually have the empowerment that they value, that they need in this context. Because an array of literature shows that whether a woman can be considered empowered or not varies greatly based on the context and their individual needs and values. Also, the ability of higher education to enable empowerment is conditional and uncertain. So I wanted to look at this complex issue. Can women be actually considered empowered? Can they actually be seen as, do they feel themselves empowered by virtue of their higher education? Can their higher education be credited with their empowerment? And this is a complex issue because, first of all, questioning the ability of education to empower people is like you're going against everything that development campaigns, international development campaigns have pretty much established as fact. Also, questioning what empowerment is complex because it's a pretty much individualized thing, and also questioning whether higher education, the experience of it, empowered somebody is something that you need to follow at best during a longitudinal study, and I didn't have that much time. So what I found is that existing frameworks like feminist theories and the capability approach that had previously been used to examine empowerment were inadequate. I found that it was necessary to develop a more encompassing framework that will capture the multifaceted nature of Cameroonian women's disempowerment or empowerment. And that's where I go to from here. My research strategy. So the design, as you can see on the screen, was born of an Afrocentric and transformative paradigmatic assumptions. And it followed qualitative, specifically engaged narrative inquiry. Which demanded the construction of an original African feminist application of the capability approach. I targeted 20 women, 5 per institution, university, 4 universities across the country to properly represent the different types of higher education in Cameroon and the actually diversity of the population, because we have Cameroon is one of the most diverse countries in the world and typically known as the melting pot of Africa. I did, as regards to my method of data collection, I did one-on-one live story interviews and also a participatory analysis workshop. I did narrative analysis intertwined with sequentially. Thus, I did both narrative analysis and analysis of narratives in such a way that I could tell their stories, but also present their stories in a way that, in a categorized manner, to respond to key research questions, such as whether they considered themselves empowered versus whether they could be considered empowered from this African feminist capability approach perspective. Theorization, and I did my theorization by operationalizing or adapting existing operationalizations such that I could say what an empowering education would be in this context and what empowerment would mean in this context. So this is where I'm going to, this is what I'm trying to present here. So I have 2 forms of recentering. How did I recenter the African in this research? And as I say, decolonizing and Africanizing, or decolonizing and indigenizing, are different things. So in recentering the African in theory, I did that by merging frameworks and adapting existing operationalizations. I merged the capability approach frame with African feminist lens to develop a more like I said, encompassing frame that will be able to capture the multidimensional issues that we have in this context, the differences in values and needs, and interrogate better. I resented the African in practice by ensuring that the voices of my African subjects were underscored throughout the process. And this was done through the participatory analysis workshop and narrative, the life story interviews. I'm going to go into detail to show exactly how I did that. This is step 1 of theoretical collaboration. You might be familiar with Robens's capabilitarian, 2017 publication on the capability approach, where she herself describes the approach as open-ended that needs to be closed adequately for use. And prior to this study, most studies that use the capability approach tend to close the approach with Western feminist theories, Western feminist lenses. So I was using an African feminist approach to close it, to complement this inadequate, or this, I want to say inadequate, but this broad and open-ended framework. Robens generously offers a modular guide on how to construct capabilitarian theories or applications, and that's what I use to develop the African feminist capability approach. Following this guide, I basically marry the capability approach with African feminist thought to develop a new application, and this application has as its module A the following concepts, the following needs. Module B, this, and module C, this is how I constructed. That was the process of theoretical collaboration between two different frameworks. In terms of, I further did theoretical collaboration through operationalizing. Now, what you see on the screen is 2 operationalizations of through 2 existing or pre-existing, prior to my work, operationalizations of what empowerment is. And there is Robens's work that has informed policy for a long time, 1997, sorry. And she has types of power, categorizations of power as an operationalization of what empowerment would be. And then there is work by Murphy Graham and Lloyd, which is more recent, 2016. And she has an illustration of what an empowering education would look like, and she calls it the empowering education framework. This is an operationalization based on the capability approach. So I adapted those operationalizations by using African feminist capability approach that I had created earlier during the study. And based on the African feminist capability approach, I had different forms of power, or more forms of power than what Rowland's 1997 work had, and which reflected what my participants said and what the African feminist and capability approach principles outlined. An adaptation of what empowering education would look like also gave form to this second figure that you can see in red, with what would an education that enables freedom for look like? What would an education that enables power from within look like? What would an education that enables or fosters power to, or freedom from, or power with, power over? How would that look like in African context, in this context? And that's how I operationalized what was existing already. Methodological collaborations. Step 1, what I did was, since I was doing a life story interviews, and life stories, narratives in general, already understood as decolonizing and putting you're already known for putting the subject prior, because you're telling their stories, you're acting for their opinions in detail, in depth. And so the narrative method is already considered one that is pretty participatory in that aspect. However, narratives are also criticized because what happens in terms of data validity and reliability. Because what happens is researchers tend to take these stories and then you have to go restore it. You can't, a narrative interview lasts minimum of 90 minutes sometimes my interviews range between 95 minutes and 180 minutes. So you can't put all of that data in the research. So what happens is, in the course of restoring, narratives are actually criticized because the researchers tend to cut what they want to cut, and they cherry pick and put what they want to put in the work. So through methodological collaboration here, I tried to make the restoring what was the edited version that will go into my work. I tried to make it collaborative. We co-created the new restored version together. And I took to do this, I had to create a table where that would serve to do narrative, how to call it, coding. And the table would present a synopsis of the life stories, that 25,000 word document that was a transcription of the life story interview. Then from there, we'll do a mapping of areas where the disempowerment was found, valued capabilities that I could see, that I'll map those out into these different categories. There's another table where I'll do an evaluation of their disempowerment using data from the participatory analysis workshop. Was there an instance where the student considered themselves, their self-efficacy? Was there a time that they considered themselves empowered, a time that they did not consider themselves empowered? And what point in their life was that? I'll also consider the fact that restoring is a literary skill. You are still writing a story. Narrative analysis requires that. I will try to see how they describe their story. What did the participants outline with regards to that? What are the high points? What is the story arc? Do they see themselves as having been empowered through their higher education? Was that a high point or a low point? That kind of thing. So that's how I collaborated with them in the methodological part, in the form of restoring their narratives. Next to that, we had a participation analysis workshop. And this workshop was produced, basically was the participatory aspect of the research was produced by the participants. At the end of each life story interview, I would ask them, how do you want to, if you were the one studying this problem, if you were the one studying the assumption that you are overeducated, what would you do? And these are master's students, actually about to graduate, second year master's students. So I consider them my colleagues, co-creators in the knowledge that I was doing. So they would suggest these activities, and these are the activities that formed what their suggestions were the activities that formed the workbook that we did at the participation analysis workshop. But prior to the workshop, prior to doing the activities, I introduced them. I taught them the capability approach. I taught them about African feminisms. So I shared my theory with them. I shared that African feminist capability approach with them so they could come on board with me and analyze their data together. And I used what they analyzed and factored in to the research. So it wasn't only what I said, how I analyzed their data, but I also said, okay, what do you think about your own life story now that you've been introduced to the capability approach concepts, now that you've been enlightened with African feminism? What do you think? How do you analyze this aspect of your life, this period of disempowerment or empowerment, or what higher education gave you, what higher education should have given you? A takeaway from the research or the outcome of this theoretical and methodological collaborations for me was that we are better together, essentially. Though good individually, the merger of my theoretical frameworks what enabled me to have glasses that enable more sentient research findings. I was able to say, okay, find intersections that if I had used just one framework, I wouldn't have been able to capture. I was able to ask more of the right questions and interrogate what was valued. I know the capability approach, for example, says we should ask, what do these people value being and doing? But with African feminism, I was able to also question, why do they value this? Is it because of their socialization and coloniality that has been, that pervades everything about your lives? I was able to center the stakeholders through methodological collaboration. I was able to center them by asking them, how would they study this problem? What do they actually think with regards to the assumption that they have had too much book? By putting them in the limelight, by taking them along with me, giving them the knowledge behind what I was doing, the African feminist capability approach, theorization, by teaching them this and inviting them to analyze their data with me, I was able to ensure some research impact. I didn't just leave with your data, I left something with them as well. And I think this illustrated what it means to do feminist research on the African continent. But more so, I actually appreciated the methodological collaboration because it definitely enhanced narrative capability, the ability to tell their stories properly, because the participatory analysis workshop was a kind of validity testing, reliability testing, because they could affirm some things in writing on their own through their own questioning. Okay, so going forward, the lessons I think we should be taking on elsewhere, recommendations for future. Recentering, you might like the idea of how I did recentering in theory and practice in my research. But it can be, while my research illustrates one way of recentering African in theory and practice, there are many other ways to do it. You can marry indigenous frameworks with canonized frameworks, such as I have done, or such as others have done. There, I think, just consider, for example, the most popular environmental theory right now would be that of ecological economy, and basically saying that we should save the planet so that we can continue using it. Perhaps if we use African philosophies of environmental relationships, such as Ohanfie by a Nigerian scholar, we could inform or marry them with these existing canonized frameworks. I suggest this because the existing canonized frameworks have concepts already that have been developed, have been operationalized often, and sometimes it's not like we're saying replace everything. That's not what decolonizing is. It's not replacing what has been canonized in Western theory with new canonized African philosophies like Ubuntu. That's not what it is. That would be lazy. It's more of finding what exactly it is in this context that will fit us. So, and undoing, decentering what was there to inform, collaborate better. And so other ways you could recenter, for example, is informing canonized theories, canonized frames with indigenous knowledge. With regard to this second recommendation, I have seen work by Botswanan feminist educationalist Gabo Siane demonstrates this. In her 2011 work, she makes a case for one of the few named African feminist theories of education by adapting Mesereau's renowned transformative learning theory. So she adapts that existing canonized work, the transformative learning theory is well known, upon criticizing it, informing it with African feminist thought, and in this way she develops her own African feminist transformative learning theory. Another way to go about centering the African in theory would be operationalizing African philosophies for use in critique and evaluation. This has been done recently. I've seen work by Wumpini Mohammed do this. She operationalizes the Northern Ghanaian philosophy of Bill Chinzi, to guide her methodological strategy for communication research. You can also recenter the African in practice by ensuring co-creation of knowledge throughout the process. make sure, and when I say ensuring co-creation, it means like either you engage them in restoring data or you engage them in the way you are in the process of you developing the methodology. That's participatory methods. You can also do this by validating alternative or counter-hegemonic sources. A way African feminist thought or African philosophy generally has been marginalized and cancelled throughout history is that we're considering that, oh, this is not thought because it has not been written down, or this way is too informal, too colloquial to be academic. It's up to us to validate this by either operationalizing it or making it valid in a way that says, okay, this is a source of knowledge. I can tell you how to cite it. All of these things are constructed. So it's up to us now to construct. Rather than using what has already been constructed, we have to construct and validate our own. And another, like, you can also ensure that you're recentering the African in practice. If you are not, and if you're a non-Indigenous African researcher studying African issues, decenter yourself and center your subjects. Make sure that you are not the one who problematizes this. You didn't come to this context and say this was a problem. You ensure that they see that what exactly is the problem according to them. In my opinion, I would say more collaborations will yield, have a lot to yield if we do more collaborations in methodologically and theoretically. Has a lot of promise. It will definitely yield more epistemic justice. Epistemic injustice is considered or understood here as unfairness in the generation of knowledge, such as how it is communicated and how it is understood. And we will definitely have stronger informational basis. All of our international policies, if you look at underlying theoretical frames, their underlying theoretical frames are often the problem. And work by Chilisa and Siane capture this best by demonstrating how the very problematic women in development approach had an underlying theory of liberal feminist thought. And that's why till date, we have still been suffering some of the problems that we have with regards to gender and education research and practice. More collaborations will definitely yield a reduced gap between research and practice, which is born out of lack of communication or poor communication and interaction between researchers and practitioners. If we do more collaborations between researchers and practitioners, between the researcher and the community, we'll be able to operationalize knowledge more rather than just theorize in vain. It will definitely ensure less epistemic dominance. There is a periphery core divide or relationship between the global north and global south, where what is theory is defined by them, what knowledge is defined by them, then they study what is the raw material or the data in the global south. And this ensures some kind of Western or global north hegemony over what is knowledge. And if we follow collaborations, if we use this method of theoretical collaborations between global north and global south frameworks, we'll be able to undo this epistemic dominance of the global north. In the end, I'm inviting you to consider from a different light, to think about more how you can collaborate in your research if you're studying African issues, if you're studying whether in higher education or out of higher education. What could you do to, because it's a saying, there's a saying that goes, we stand on the shoulders of giants. I would add that to ensure that all the giants are not the same. May the giants on whose shoulders we stand be of different races, different classes, different genders, so our perspectives are truly multidimensional. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Monique, for the enlightening presentation, demonstrating how theoretical frameworks and the engagement of participants in both the collection and analysis of data can foster better and more contextually suited knowledge production. I now hand over to our discussant, Edward Moyonga.
Thank you very much, Moffat. Thank you very much to both Dr. Carmen and Dr. Monique for the wonderful presentations. So as you are presenting, I was just taking a few notes. First of all, I would want to start with the first presentation. I thought it was an excellent presentation. It was more like a build-up on the earlier talk that was presented by Dr. Oji, where he emphasized the need to align our research within the global sustainability agenda. And I thought the research by Carmen and the team did justice. It makes a valid contribution to this discourse by illuminating what it takes to build a sustainable university community. Then another thing that was really great was the methodology aspect. I think this speaks to both Monique and the first presentation, where the involvement of participatory research approach. I think this is great. It is welcome as it gives the participants or the students in this case a voice in the process of research, that we are not just writing about them without them. So that was really great. And for the both presentations, the application of the colonial thinking as well as the capability approach is very much appreciated. In as much as it is appreciated, I think it also brings certain questions, especially in the first presentation. One, we are using a decolonial shift, and yet that is a project that is funded by a global North university. And without doubt, this can, of course, have its own implication in terms of power and control of the research and probably a future publication. So I would want probably come into a comment on this one in terms of the relationships between UFS and the funders, which is University of Bristol. And then the other thing, as you are concluding, you talked of debating on the use of certain terms. I think you did well to settle on the concept of Ubuntu. I think Ubuntu, it kinds of exemplifies the African in us rather than the social political terms like ujamaa, like humanism, as it was in Zambia by Kenneth Kaunda. These terms, yeah, in as much as they do reflect what it means to be African, but these are also contested terms, like Tandeka Tandawire, in his paper, Non-Organic Intellectuals at Lenin, he criticizes actually Nyerere, Kaunda, and Kwame Nkrumah for bringing these nice concepts, but at the same time, they depended very much on foreign intellectuals as advisors, as intellectual advisors. And because of that, I think such terminologies, especially in the 60s, they found it very difficult to permeate through the African higher education sectors because most of the intellectuals did not buy into them. And so I think that was a very good decision. I only have just a few questions. I know the presentation was on South Africa, and I understand that South Africa has a unique history as compared to the rest of the African continent. But your title, it captured the rest of Africa in terms of the Pan-African concept that you use. So I just wanted to find out what will be your interpretation of a Pan-African university, and do you have in mind probably any African country or university where the idea of Ubuntu-centered university can be applied apart from the South African context? I'm sure probably Betha would also answer that since she's from Tanzania. And then as you were saying, as you were making your presentation, I also realized that much of the emphasis on the post-pandemic university has been on the elements of pedagogy in terms of how universities should be teaching, but less on what should be taught. So on this account, I would want you to, Carmen, I would want you to just please give a brief comment on an ideal post-pandemic curriculum in a Pan-African university. And then Monique, as we are making a presentation, I was very much interested, such that I googled a few articles on African feminism, and one of the paper I found was Ruvimbo Goredema 2010 African Feminism, and she asked this question, which I would love you to answer: how can African men contribute to the discourse without being identified as an abnormality, who have decided to go against their natural male state by supporting women's rights and causes, and in the way weaken the advantage of our patriarchy? Probably you can answer that. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentations. Carmen, would you go first?
Thank you, Edward, for all these amazing comments and great questions. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to reply on the name of the whole team, but just to go briefly, because we are also running out of time, and I would like Monique as well to reply to you. Yeah, I mean, in the relation of the power between the University of the Free State and Bristol is quite interesting because they've been trying to approach the whole process really open-ended, and they've been really, I mean, there are, of course, like structures and systems that we needed to follow, but there is a lot of space for transgression within the process, and still the ongoing connection with them and so on. So of course, we can always reflect. There are always inflection points that we need to keep thinking about. But thank you for that question, because it's not something that I was thinking, and I think it's important to have it into consideration as working here in connection with them. And thank you for mentioning about the aspect of Ubuntu being a contested term. I think that's quite important, and I think that's exactly what we're trying to do, what it means here, and what we can say, and even is the term, expressing what we want to express with it. So in terms of our interpretation of the Pan-African University, I'm sorry I cannot answer this as an individual, because I will need my colleagues to help me here. I think at the end, because it was all this discussion about Pan-Africanism as including, because we were also discussing about Black and Black identity, but we felt that an African identity. So it was a whole session trying to figure it out, what it is that represent us all. And we decided that this Pan-Africanism, it was inclusive from international students that are part of the team, at the same time as it could bring, this African-rooted way of thinking, but also the oppression of African people more than the thinking. And that's the reason, but the interpretation of the Pan-African University, I think, is probably going to come out of the project. So I think we just need to wait a bit to see that. The application of Ubuntu in another university, I think it depends on the case. And obviously, as we are doing here, we believe that projects like this need to happen in other places in the African continent, so we can see the differences and how we need different implementations and practices in universities to deal with the contextual circumstances of each university representing the local people and the local needs. And the ideal post-pandemic curriculum, I think there is no such a ideal, but as I said, part of the project is about proposing this aspirational aim, but making on the way, you know, generating recommendations. So, I mean, part of our thinking has been always about this flexible university. So I will say from our team, what I will reply from our thinking together is that the ideal post-pandemic curriculum is a curriculum that is flexible enough to accommodate the different needs. And I know this is a really open answer to it, but it's an answer that can be rooted in the practices that we are doing within the university space. So I feel like I leave all the questions open, but I hope this gives food for thought, you know, for all of us to think further. Thank you.
Monique?
And contribute to the discourse without being identified as an abnormality that go against its natural male state by a woman's. Okay. Well, I do not know which part of my my presentation brought this up, but I would say I do not think a man being part of discourse on what method on collaboration.
So she talks of
theoretical collaboration.
Yeah, thank you. She talks of like the challenges of people, of men like me. If I wanted to use let's say a feminist approach in my research, like, you know,
Okay,
how would I be perceived? I think that's where she's getting.
Okay. Although what I was actually focusing on was collaboration, methodological and theoretical, between global North and global South, I can see how you might be trying to understand in terms of collaboration between men and women in, let's just say, African feminist research or research of generally feminist issues. I do not, again, I think you can apply the same principles that I discussed in the presentation in this situation. You decenter yourself as a male. Not only your male gender perspective, but ensure that you ask women what they think about these assumptions that are canonized or assumptions that are accepted as fact. For example, the idea of you being a strong woman, or a strong African woman, or some as a celebration of womanhood. Whereas perhaps if you ask the men, you might find out that, well, we don't actually want to be strong, we have to be strong. I wouldn't say it goes against, considering that feminism is basically the belief in equal rights and fair treatment. I do not say it goes against any natural male state. We're human before we're male and female. So it's basically saying if we're advocating for human rights, feminist rights are human rights. So it's nothing unnatural about that. Men can be feminists just as much as women can be feminists. Men can be feminists while some women might not be feminists. It's not really something that is unnatural for either one. So it's more of a matter of a belief and acting on that belief, or an ideology and acting on that, or living out that ideology. I hope this answers your question. Patriarchy affects, the last part it says patriarchy affects both men and women. So yeah, it will definitely not be weakening the advantage of patriarchy. It will be an advantage to the movement if both men and women are on board and collaborating.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just found that question in the same article, so I thought it would be very much interesting to get views from you. Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box. Any questions from the audience? I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, Moffat, you can take over.
Okay, thank you very much to all our speakers for this plenary session 1. I think this ends the session. Since we are a bit 5 minutes earlier, I will announce that we take a lunch break and we'll converge again at 1 o'clock. Depending on your internet connectivity, either you can stay online or you can log off and join again at 1 o'clock for the plenary session 2. Thank you, everyone.